Hello everyone, it is me, Two Shads. Now, I've already gone through what I consider to be the very worst of Spongebob, so now I think it's time we get to the best. Like I said, when SpongeBob's at its best, it can be up there with some of the greats. So I think it's time we talk about what they got right. Now, narrowing down this list to 10 was very hard because there are just dozens of great episodes. I probably could have even done a top 20 and I'd still be leaving off a lot of classics. But I was able to narrow it down to these 10. These are the ones I can watch and enjoy at any time, regardless of age. So let's get into this. This is the top 10 best SpongeBob episodes. Number 10 is Argh. This episode is about Mr. Krabs becoming obsessed with a pirate themed board game and taking SpongeBob and Patrick on a real treasure hunt. Now, if you've seen my worst SpongeBob episodes lists, you'll know that I don't really like Mr. Krabs very much as a character, but I can't help but really enjoy him here. I mean, if you've ever become obsessed with something, which who hasn't, then you can relate to Mr. Krabs in this episode. This is this episode got me to enjoy him, so I gotta give him credit. And that's not to say SpongeBob and Patrick aren't fun either. I mean, Patrick's just giving out some of my favorite lines like, "Oh, East, I thought you said West," and
I'm Peggy the Pirate.
and "Oh, Blindbeard the Pirate." A lot of funny moments in this episode, so I really enjoy it overall. Number 9 is No Pictures, Please. This episode is about Patrick taking a tourist around Bikini Bottom. Now, this episode is definitely one where they got Patrick right. He's dumb without being frustratingly dumb, and as a result, the mayhem he causes is very fun to watch. And the reactions they get from people are also hilarious as well. Now, this episode is very recent, the most recent on this list, actually. So people are saying that SpongeBob is starting to return to form, and if this episode is anything to go by, I think they're right, and hopefully it stays that way for years to come. Number 8 is Imitation Crabs. This episode is about Plankton disguising as Mr. Krabs in an effort to get SpongeBob to give him the formula. Now, as I've said before, Plankton is my favorite character on SpongeBob, and he is at his best in this episode. I mean, just seeing him impersonate Mr. Krabs badly, but having SpongeBob believe him should be frustrating on paper, but it's hilarious in this episode, especially when Mr. Krabs comes along and Plankton disguises himself. Now, and the things Plankton goes through are really hilarious to watch. This is definitely one of the funnier episodes, and one I personally would recommend. Number 7 is Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5. This episode is about Barnacle Boy turning evil, and SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Sandy helping Mermaid Man to fight him off. This is my favorite of the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes, and it has been since I was just a little boy. Just watching SpongeBob and friends team up with Mermaid Man as superheroes is great, and all of the characters in this one are at their best. This is always one that I recommend to people who haven't seen SpongeBob to try to get them into the characters. And if you've never seen SpongeBob before, I would recommend giving this one a watch as well. Number 6 is Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost. This episode is about SpongeBob and Patrick thinking they killed Squidward and thinking he's a ghost. Undeniably, for me, this is the most underrated episode of the entire series. I mean, there are great moments here, like when Squidward is asking them to bring him food and Patrick throws a watermelon right into his mouth. The part where they're his slaves are very funny. And then there's what I think maybe even better when they think he's a ghost in denial, but when Squidward confesses he's not actually dead, and they try to send him to the great beyond. All around, a fun episode and very underrated. If you haven't seen this episode, maybe you should check it out. Number 5 is the camping episode. This episode is about SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward going camping. It's a simple concept, but it works so well. I mean, everything SpongeBob and Patrick do right, Squidward, of course, does wrong, and it's funny to watch. Plus, the sea bear attack is funny no matter how many times I watch it. Plus, the campfire song is probably my favorite song of the entire show. All around, this is a legendary episode that just shows off the characters of SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward just so perfectly that I can't help but say it's one of my favorites. Number 4 is Band Geeks. This episode is about Squidward trying to show up his rival Squilliam by turning Bikini Bottom into a marching band and having to perform at the Bubble Bowl. This is probably the most well-regarded episode of SpongeBob of all of the episodes, and I can see why. Every character here gets their moment in the spotlight, and the ending where they sing Sweet Victory is probably one of the most iconic scenes of the whole show. So, plus it's got great lines like, "Do instruments of torture count?" and "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" I mean, it's a classic episode of a classic show, and easily one of my favorites. Number 3 is Sandcastles in the Sand. This episode is about SpongeBob and Patrick going to the beach and engaging in a sandcastle war. I don't know what an episode this great is doing in season 6, but I'm not complaining. Everything they do with the sandcastles is hilarious and awesome at the same time. And the big finale where they go into the air and fight between the robot and the jet is just an incredible scene. Like, I did not know they were capable of making something like this at this point in the show's run, but I am so glad that this exists, and it'll probably always be a favorite of mine. Number 2 is Fun. This episode is about SpongeBob befriending Plankton because he doesn't have any friends. This episode is just so funny and honestly kind of heartwarming. SpongeBob's good nature is on full display here, and Plankton probably comes the closest he's ever come to redeeming himself. I mean, sure, he returns to his old ways in the end, but that's why we love him. And of course, watching Plankton slowly learn to have fun is great, and the Fun song is another classic and is up there with the Campfire song is one of my favorites. All around, an episode I highly recommend. And number 1 is Sailor Mouth. This episode is about SpongeBob and Patrick discovering a bad word on the back of a garbage can and starting to use it around. This episode is incredibly hilarious. I mean, just seeing the reactions of the people when SpongeBob and Patrick are swearing at the Krusty Krab is incredible. And when Mr. Krabs confronts them about it, their reaction is hilarious too. And of course, that doesn't last long when they try to stop. And they try to tell Mr. Krabs again, only for him to start saying every word there is. And then, in one of the funniest scenes I have ever seen, SpongeBob and Patrick go and tell Mr. Krabs in on his mom. And this is probably one of the funniest things I've ever seen. All around, this isn't just my favorite SpongeBob episode, but it holds up as one of my favorite episodes of any show I have ever watched, and will probably stay that way for many years to come. So those are my top 10 best SpongeBob episodes. I hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully you join me again in a few days when I talk about my top 5 best SpongeBob episodes of seasons 6 through 8. Until then, this is Two Sheds signing off.